Hey guys, welcome to the lecture on Henry IV Part 1. Now, as you may all know, Henry IV is a history play written by William Shakespeare. And like all histories, before moving on to Henry IV, the king, the ruler, we need to talk a bit about Richard the Second, because Henry IV usurped Richard II and came to the throne. And this incident plays a pivotal role in Henry IV. Hence, we need to talk a bit about Richard II first, and then we shall move on to Henry IV. Now, Richard II's father was Edward, the Prince of Wales, and he died in the year 1376, leaving Richard as the heir apparent. So, Edward, the Prince of Wales, was the heir apparent to the throne, and since he died in the year 1376, it made his young son Richard as the heir apparent to the throne to his grandfather, King Edward III. So King Edward III was ruling over the land, ruling over Great Britain. At that time, King Edward III's son, Edward, Prince of Wales, died, leaving Richard as the heir apparent. So Richard became the next heir to the throne. Upon the death of Edward III, the 10-year-old Richard succeeded to the throne. So when his grandfather Edward III died, Richard II, who was just 10 years old at that time, came to the throne. He succeeded the throne. During Richard's first year as the king, the government was in the hands of a series of regency councils. So now, if the king is too young to rule over the land, if the king is not matured yet, then a regent would be appointed, or a council of regents would be appointed to rule over the land pro tempore, that is, for the time being. So, regents will be placed to rule over the land for the time being. So here in Travancore, we had a regent queen, Sethu Lakshmi Bai, and Sethu Lakshmi Bai ruled over our land because the heir apparent Chitira Tirunal Balarama Varma was too young to rule the kingdom. So similar to that, since our Richard II was too young, he was just 10 years old when he succeeded the throne. Since he was too young for the throne, the Regency Council ruled over the land. And this Regency Council was influenced, and he was considerably influenced by Richard's uncle, John of Gaunt. So the government was influenced by Richard's uncle, John of Gaunt. Now you may remember John of Gaunt, right? When I taught you Chaucer, I told that John of Gaunt was the patron of Chaucer. So Richard's uncle was John of Gaunt. Now John of Gaunt plays an important role. Remember him. And the Regency Council also consisted of Thomas of Woodstock of England, and they faced several problems, most notably the 100 Years' War. A major challenge of the reign was the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Now, when I taught you Chaucer, I told you to look up a bit on the contemporaries of Chaucer. And at that time, if you have ever come across the name William Langland, you know that he is a poet who actively participated in the Peasants' Revolt. So, the kingdom again had to face the 100 Years' War and the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, which posed serious challenges to the throne. And the young king played a central part in the successful suppression of this crisis. And it is this young king who played a vital role in the suppression of the Peasants' Revolt. Now, our Richard II was less warlike than his father or grandfather. He was a person who didn't like wars. So he sought to bring an end to the 100 Years' War. So he brought an end to the 100 Years' War. He wanted peace, and he was a firm believer of the royal prerogative, that is, the king has the ultimate power over the land, more than the lords. So he restrained the power of aristocracy and relied on a private retinue for military protection instead. So he curbed the powers of aristocracy, he curbed the powers of the landlords, and he relied more on a private retinue. That is, he had his royal counselors and a group of men who are loyal to him, and he carried them for military protection. In contrast to his grandfather, Richard cultivated a refined atmosphere centered on art and culture at court, in which the king was an elevated figure. Again, our king, Richard II, had an interest in arts and literature, and he, fostered a good atmosphere in court, and he was all in favor of developing art and culture. So in the court, he was an elevated figure. He was a person of wide interest. Now, the king's dependence in a small number of courtiers caused discontent among the influential. So, as I said before, the king had with him a private retinue, and they were responsible for his protection. Now, this caused a discord or discontent among the influential aristocrats, and in 1387, control of the government was taken over by a group of aristocrats known as the Lords Appellant. So the Lords Appellant was appointed, and they took control over the land, because again the king was a minor at that time. By 1389, Richard had regained control, and for the next 8 years governed in relative harmony with his former opponents. So in 1389, Richard regained control over his throne, and he lived in a harmony with his former opponents, that is the Lords Appellant, because remember, Lords Appellants took power from Richard. Now he took his revenge on the appellants in the year 1397. Now soon after, that is around 10 to 12 years after, he took his revenge on the appellants and he executed them. Most of them were exiled and some of them were executed. Now somewhat similar history is there in Travancore too, right? We have the Ettuvitil Pillamar who were prosecuted or executed by the king. So similar to that, here again the Lords Appellant were executed by Richard II. Now the next 2 years is described in history as Richard's tyranny. This is also important for all the competitive exams. They might ask this question. Richard's tyranny. The next 2 years came to be known as the Richard's tyranny, and in 1399, after John of Gaunt died, the king disinherited Gaunt's son, Henry Bolingbroke. So when John of Gaunt died in 1399, now John of Gaunt was a person who was there in the Regency Council, and he influenced Richard II's decision when he was a child. But when John of Gaunt died, he disinherited John of Gaunt's son, Henry Bolingbroke. Now, to disinherit someone means to take away all the titles from him. So, Henry of Bolingbroke was rendered titleless and he was exiled. Henry invaded England in June 1399 with a small force that quickly grew in numbers. Because of Richard's tyranny, that is, people were in favor of Henry of Bolingbroke rather than Richard. Meeting little resistance, he deposed Richard and had himself crowned the king. So he met with little resistance from Richard's, because by that time people were fed up with Richard's and with Richard's tyranny, and even the aristocrats were there with the Henry of Bolingbroke. Even the aristocrats supported Henry of Bolingbroke, and it was easy for him to dispossess Richard. So he deposed Richard and had himself crowned the king. So Henry Bolingbroke thus became the king. This Henry Bolingbroke is our hero, Henry IV. Richard is thought to have been starved to death in captivity, although questions remain regarding his final fate. So we don't know what happened to Richard. Some say that he was starved to death. Anyway, he was killed. So this is a map of Richard II, the play written by William Shakespeare, and the play differs from the historical account. Now, this is what happens in Richard II, the play. It happens here first. One, that is in Coventry, Henry Bolingbroke is banished from England. So here, Henry Bolingbroke, son of John of Gaunt, is banished from England. And at the same time, Richard II wages a war with Ireland to put down a rebellion in Ireland. So civil wars were common at that time. So at the same time in which he banished Henry Bolingbroke, he was also participating in a war to put down a rebellion in Ireland. Now, third action takes place in Brittany, here in France. In here, close to France, in Brittany, Henry Bolingbroke raises an army in exile to challenge Richard II for the throne. So here in France, so he was exiled from Britain, the mainland. So here in Brittany, Henry Bolingbroke raises an army in exile and he challenges the throne. Okay. Now what happens after that is Henry Bolingbroke's army lands and marches southwest to Wales, rallying supporters and executing adversaries all the way. So from Brittany they travel all the way closer to Wales, okay, and there they gather supporters and they gather all the enemies of Richard II, and they are planning to execute their plan. And then what happens is that again in Wales, this is where the king is. In Wales, in the Flint Castle, Richard II surrenders to Henry of Bolingbroke. He has to surrender because there is no one, because of his tyranny, perhaps no one is there to help him now, and all the aristocrats have turned against him. So he surrenders to Henry of Bolingbroke, and again after that Richard is disposed of his throne, and he is in the Westminster Hall in London. He is disposed of his throne, that is, his throne is taken away from him. And then again in the London Palace, Henry of Bolingbroke is crowned as Henry the Fourth. Henry Bolingbroke, son of John of Gaunt, is crowned as Henry the Fourth. Now again somewhere in the Pomfret Castle it is said that Richard II is murdered. Some historians state that he was starved to death. So this is how the entire plot goes. Now at the end of this play too, I'll be showing you a similar map on how it all goes. Now we shall move on with Henry the Fourth part 1. Now this was the small character map that I gave you once again to introduce you the characters. So the main character is King Henry IV, previously Henry Bolingbroke. Now he stole the crown from his cousin Richard II. Now Henry IV is portrayed as a long suffering father because he has good for nothing sons. And then comes the next character, Prince Hal, the eldest son of Henry IV, and he has a bad boy reputation. He is slightly Machiavellian figure. He is bad and he has some saving grace in him, but he is portrayed as being a rotten apple. He has a bad reputation. And Prince Hal is guided by Sir John Falstaff. Now Falstaff is a famous fool created by William Shakespeare. Now Shakespeare has created both fools and clowns, and Falstaff comes across as a fool because he is very clever and tricky, and the Falstaff appears as a complex character. We shall deal with Falstaff later. And then there is Northumberland. Now Northumberland is Earl of Northumberland is Hotspur's father, and he was formerly Henry IV's biggest supporter. Remember, when Henry IV usurped the throne of Richard II, Northumberland also was there with him. So he was once Henry IV's biggest supporter, which means that now he is not so supportive of the king. And then there is Hotspur Percy. Now, Hotspur Percy is at first portrayed as the flower of chivalry. He is very chivalric, but he is portrayed as being hot-headed. He is portrayed as being short-tempered to the point of idiocy. Now, you may not use these words as such, but in order to remember the character, you may as well remember these words. Okay, so Hotspur Percy is portrayed as being the flower of chivalry in the kingdom, but soon when his motives are revealed, he comes across as a very hot-headed figure, a bad-tempered man who takes all the wrong decisions. Then there is Worcester, who is Hotspur's uncle, and he is the sly and manipulative character, and he is the brain behind all the operations that are happening in Henry IV Part 1. So a civil war is brewing in the background, and Worcester is the master brain behind the civil war. He is also the uncle of Hotspur Percy. Now there is Glendower. Glendower is a Welsh rebel, and he claims to have all sorts of magical powers, somewhat like our Merlin in Arthurian legends. Glendower is a Welsh rebel leader, and he claims to have all sorts of magical powers. Then there is Kate Percy, who is Hotspur Percy's wife. She is portrayed as being a long-suffering wife of Hotspur Percy, but she is a sharp-witted woman. Then there is Mistress Quickly, who is the amiable tavern hostess, and she is prone to making unintended innuendos or sexual innuendos, jokes with double meaning. So again, Mistress Quickly is closely associated with Sir John Falstaff and Prince Hal. Now, this is the plot summary. I hope that you were able to read through it. So Henry IV is the king, but his reign has been plagued by rebellion ever since he usurped the throne from Richard II. Recently, his old supporter Northumberland has been discontented. Now, Northumberland is not on good sides with the king now. To make matters worse, Northumberland's son Hotspur is considered to be the most chivalrous and proper knight of the day. Now, Northumberland has a son, and that is Hotspur Percy, and Hotspur Percy is considered to be the chivalrous knight of the land. And Hotspur Percy stands in contrast to King Henry's son, Prince Hal, who spends all his time drinking and getting into trouble with his friends, and his surrogate father-like figure, Sir John Falstaff. Now, Sir John Falstaff is portrayed as being a person who is scheming, conniving, as well as a bore. He is a person who is always up for drinking and revelry, and he is portrayed as a person who is not interested in taking care of the courtly affairs. But he spends a rather good amount of time. Though he is a knight, he spends rather a good amount of time in the taverns. He is notorious for being a thief and scoundrel. And Hal and Falstaff spend most of their time partying in the tavern. So they spend most of their time partying in the tavern, which is owned by Mistress Quickly. However, things come to a head-on when Hotspur and his uncle Worcester join forces with the Welsh wizard Glendower. So Hotspur and Worcester joins forces with Glendower later in the play and go against the king, that is King Henry IV. Now, will Prince Hal be able to be the prince that he is born to be? Because now Prince Hal is living a life of debauchery, and now can he redeem himself, and can he be the true prince of the land? That is the question. Now let's get into a summary of Act 1, Scene 1. It is set in the Royal Palace of London. In the Royal Palace of London, King Henry IV of England speaks with his councillors. Worn out by the recent civil wars that wrecked his country, Henry looks forward to a project he has been planning for a long time, joining in the Crusades. So it is quite ironic. That is, the king who suffers from, or who is worn out by the constant civil wars which were happening in his country, now wishes to join the Crusades, the holy battles. So from one battle to another. So he wishes to join the Crusades. He plans to lead a military expedition to Jerusalem, the Holy Land, to join in battle between the Islamic people who currently occupy it. So he wishes to go to Jerusalem, and now Jerusalem is occupied by the Islamic people, and he, that is the king, Henry the IV, wants to take part in the noble battle, and he wishes to occupy Jerusalem. And the European enemies, he wishes to help he wishes to help the European enemies, and he is trying to seize Jerusalem for the sake of Christianity. He wants to take Jerusalem from the Islamic people, and he wants to take part in the Crusades and be a part of the European armies, and for the sake of Christianity, he wishes to fight the Holy War. However, news from two separate borders of Henry's kingdom almost immediately changes his plans. But as I said earlier, the kingdom was ravaged by civil wars, internal conflicts, and news from two separate borders of the kingdom immediately changes his plans. Skirmishes have broken out between English forces on the one side and Scottish and Welsh rebels on the other side. So small troubles have been brewing between the English forces on the one side and the Scottish and Welsh rebels on the other side. The king's trusted advisor, Earl of Westmoreland, relays the bad news that Edmund Mortimer, an English military leader, has lost a battle against a band of guerrilla fighters in Wales. So Edmund Mortimer was an English military leader, and Earl of Westmoreland, who is the king's trusted advisor, says to the king that Edward Mortimer was taken as a prisoner by a band of guerrilla fighters in Wales, who are led by the powerful and mysterious Welsh rebel Owain Glendower. So the Welsh rebels are led by the mysterious and powerful Owain Glendower, and Mortimer is held a captive by the Welsh rebels, the guerrilla fighters in Wales, and these guerrilla fighters in Wales are led by Owain Glendower. I hope that it was clear. Glendower has captured Mortimer, and the rebels have slaughtered thousands of Mortimer's soldiers. So Glendower has captured Mortimer, and the Welsh rebels have captured Mortimer's soldiers, that is the British soldiers. Moreover, Welsh women, following their tradition, have mutilated the soldiers' corpse, and the Welsh women, whenever they take part in war, and if there is a bloodshed, and if the thousands of soldiers die in war, then the Welsh woman would mutilate the enemies' bodies. So they will they not only kill off their enemies, but they will mutilate their bodies. So it is a sign of internal conflict brewing in the borders. From the other English border, Westmoreland adds. Now Westmoreland, the royal councillor, says that from the other English border, he has just received information that young Harry Percy, nicknamed Hotspur, another of King's best military men, is currently engaged in a heated battle with Archibald. So the king has already lost one of his good military men, which is Mortimer. Now Henry Percy or Hotspur Percy, Harry Percy or Hotspur Percy, is one of king's best military men, and he is currently engaged in a battle with Archibald, who is also known as Douglas. And Douglas is the leader of the Scottish rebels. Now, who was the leader of the Welsh rebels? Glendower. And who was the leader of the Scottish rebels? Douglas. King Henry has been previously told about this development. It turns out and already possesses an update about the outcome. Young Hotspur has defeated the Douglas and his army of 10,000 and taken prisoner several important figures among the Scotsmen, including Douglas's own son Mordick, Earl of Fife. So the king says that he already knows about this particular incident. That is, he already knows that Hotspur is currently engaged in a heated battle with Archibald or Douglas, and he says that he can even predict the outcome of the event, that is, Douglas would soon be captured. And as the king says it, it is true that Douglas is truly captured by Hotspur, and he was also able to take prisoner several important Scotsmen. He was able to take several Scotsmen as prisoners, and he was also able to take Douglas's own son Mordick, the Earl of Fife, as a prisoner, whom Hotspur Percy. So Hotspur Percy was able to defeat the Scottish rebels, whereas Mortimer was not able to defeat Welsh rebels who were led by Glendower. But here Hotspur Percy was able to defeat the Scottish rebels, and he was able to defeat Douglas, and he was able to take Mordick, Douglas's son, as a prisoner. King Henry is pleased at the news and cannot help comparing Hotspur's achievement with the idleness of his son, Prince Harry. Now, King is here comparing his son with Hotspur's achievement, because he thinks, like any other father, he thinks that his son is not up to the mark, but he considers Percy as a noble character. Now, Prince Harry is at the same age as Hotspur, but he has not won any military glory. Indeed, Harry's dishonorable behavior makes King Henry ashamed. He wishes that Hotspur were his son instead. So, Harry has not yet achieved any military glory. His son Harry, that is, Prince Hal, has not yet achieved any military glory, and he feels that Hal's behavior is quite dishonorable, and the king himself is very ashamed of him, and he wishes that Hotspur were his son instead. He wishes that Hotspur should have been his son instead. Like some of our parents do, they constantly make comparisons of us with others, right? Hotspur, however, is behaving very strangely. He has spent word to King Henry that he plans to send only one of his prisoners, Mordick, to the king and retain the rest. But Hotspur has some other plans brewing in his head. Now, he has been behaving rather strangely, and he sends a word that he is only willing to give the king one prisoner, and that is Mordick. Now, this action flouts standard procedure. This goes against standard procedure, as the king has an automatic right to all noble prisoners captured in a battle. Now, the king has all the rights over the prisoners of war or the prisoners of battle, and here Hotspur is not willing to give away the prisoners. Now, this goes against the law of the land. Westmoreland suggests that Hotspur's rebellious act comes at the prompting of his uncle, the Earl of Worcester. Now, Westmoreland, the royal councillor, is able to discern this much, that Hotspur's rebellious act comes from the promptings of his uncle Worcester. So Worcester has been manipulating Hotspur to take such a decision. Now, Worcester has become hostile to the king. He has become quite hostile, has gone against the king, and the angered Henry concurs and says that he has sent for Hotspur, demanding that he come and explain himself. So, king is angry because Hotspur is not willing to give the prisoners. Now, the king is angry. He does not know what is brewing in Hotspur's mind. He does not know if this is some kind of a conspiracy laid by Hotspur as well as his uncle Earl of Worcester. So the king asked Hotspur to come towards him and to explain himself. Henry decides that the Crusades project will have to be put off and that he will hold the court the next Wednesday at Windsor Castle to hear what Hotspur has to say. So the king has now decided that he won't go on the Crusades because he has so many internal affairs to look after. So he says that he would hold the court next Wednesday. He would convene the court next Wednesday at Windsor Castle to hear what Hotspur Percy has to say. Remember, the king considered Hotspur Percy as his own son, and now that Hotspur, the very same Hotspur, has gone against him. So the king wishes to know what is happening in Hotspur's mind. Now moving on to the analysis of the scene, the plot of Henry IV is an outgrowth of the dramatic historical events from England's past. So this is a historical play and this is an outgrowth from England's past. The king in the opening lines remarked that he will no longer spill English blood on the English soil. That is, he will no longer witness another civil war. And this refers to the recent power struggles between the various nobles. Shakespeare would have expected his audience to know the events to which Henry refers to, because this is, after all, England that he is staging the play in, and everyone knows about these events. So Shakespeare would have expected the audience to know about the events which have led to the current political situation in England. Indeed, Shakespeare himself had dramatized them in one of his early plays, Richard II. As a result of a civil war in England, Henry managed to win the crown from Richard II. Remember, Henry Bolingbroke was able to usurp Richard II because of a civil war, because Richard II was against the nobles, he was against the aristocrats, so he was able to create a civil war and he was able to usurp the throne. So Henry managed to win the crown from Richard II, the previous king. Henry is now haunted by the violence that he used to gain the throne. So whenever you use violence to gain something, you will be haunted by your own crime. You will be haunted by guilt. And Henry is haunted by guilt that he must fight another world war to stay in power. Henry is already worn down by a vague sense of guilt, by the uneasiness about the legitimacy of his seat on the throne. Now, Henry was not the heir apparent through the throne, right? He has usurped the king and he has taken the throne. He had no direct blood relation with the throne, and he is a bit uneasy with his seat on the throne. Henry has blood on his hands since he had Richard murdered after overthrowing him. So Henry had not only overthrown Richard, but he had also murdered him. Henry bears himself regally, but he is so concerned about the recent unrest in his country that he is shaken and wan with care. So he is able to be a royal king, but he is concerned with the recent unrest which is brewing in his kingdom, and he is shaken by it and he is wan with care. He is haunted by it, or he is pale with worry. He is wan with care means he is pale with worry. Although he is very old at the play's he is not very old at the play's opening. So in the opening of the play, the king is not portrayed as being very old, but life has taken a greater toll on him, and because of all the past incidents that had happened in his life, and because of the guilt that he feels because he had usurped the throne and killed the king, so he appears as notably being fatigued. He is tired, he is notably fatigued. Another thing that is to be mentioned is that two major characters of this plays are being introduced by the characters' discussion. They don't appear in the scene. Both Prince Hal as well as Hotspur Percy does not appear on the screen or on the scene, but they are introduced through the characters' discussions. Through other characters' discussion, this scene also introduces Hotspur, a young man the same age as Prince Harry and something of a foil. Now, in the play, it is portrayed that Hotspur is a the same age as Harry, but in reality, Harry was much more younger than Hotspur. Now, why is it that Shakespeare portrayed Hotspur as the same age as that of Harry? Because he wants to provide Hotspur a foil, or he wants to provide Prince Hal or Harry a foil. That is, Hotspur's characters and emotions, or even attributes, should contrast with Harry's character, emotion, and attributes. So they function as contrasts to each other. Though they have same given name, that is, both are called as Hotspur is known as Henry Hotspur, or Henry Percy, or Hotspur Percy. Though they have the same name, Hotspur and Harry are as different as night and day. Both of them carry the same name. Harry, they both are known by the name Harry or Henry, and still they are poles apart. They are night and day. They are as different as night and day. Hotspur is bold, quick-tempered, and he loves battle. Westmoreland and King Henry talks about his remarkable accomplishments in defeating Earl of Douglas. But Harry, on the other hand, appears as being lazy, cowardly, and self-indulgent. So Hotspur is bold, he is quick-tempered, he is also hot-tempered, and he loves battle. But Harry is portrayed as being lazy, cowardly, and self-indulgent. That is, he is a person who is more or less concerned only with himself. The comparison that the king makes between Hotspur and Harry is the first of such comparisons that occur as the balance of power and honor shifts between the two young men. King Henry believes that Hotspur is the theme of honor's tongue. But what riot and dishonor stain the brow of my young Harry? So the king here is providing a contrast between Hotspur and Harry, and this is one of the first contrasts that he makes. The king believes that Hotspur is the theme of honor's tongue. Hotspur is an honorable man. So any person who speaks about honor would speak of Hotspur Percy. But riot and dishonor stain the brow of my young Harry. But his young Harry, his own son, is a person who is filled with riot. That is, his character is so dishonorable, and he is so extravagant. Right means it also shows extravagance. So again, his son is extravagant, he's a dishonorable man. So he makes a sharp contrast between Hotspur Percy and Henry or Harry. Henry even wishes that Hotspur were his real son. So he even says that he wishes Hotspur to be his son, since Hotspur is the one who seems to behave in a truly princely fashion. Harry eventually realizes the value of Hotspur's qualities too, and he strives to match and surpass them as he grows into his princely role. Now, it is not just the king who recognizes Hotspur's quality. Now, Hotspur in the beginning is portrayed as being the one true knight, and the king wants him to be his own son. He wants Hotspur to be his own son. He wishes Hotspur would become his son. Though it shows that Hotspur is more chivalrous and more regal than Harry. But Harry also recognizes this. Harry also recognizes Hotspur's qualities, and later Harry strives to be like Hotspur, and he even grows to surpass him. And therein lies the excellence of this play, where a man is at first portrayed as being a good for nothing fellow, but slowly he rises from that role, and he becomes more noble than the noble character who is portrayed at the beginning of the play as being truly noble and regal. Somewhat similar to our Picaresque novels and the like. Finally, the scene introduces us to some of the interesting cast of characters who later fight against Henry's forces. Some of these figures are not English at all, but instead lead native rebel bands from the countries bordering England. Now, these are, as I said before, you have Owain Glendower, who leads the Welsh side from the borders, and then you have Douglas, who is leading the Scottish rebels. So these men are not from England, but they live in the borders of England, and they are brewing a civil war. Now, England holds a tenuous control over all these land. England is the main land, and it holds power over this neighboring lands too, and that is why they are brewing a discontent and they are trying to usurp the king. Reports are made of the fearless Archibald, Earl of Douglas, powerful Scottish leader. So again, a person named Archibald is being called. He's the Earl of Douglas, and he's a powerful Scottish leader who fought Hotspur near the northern border of England. Also discussed is the irregular and wild Owain Glendower. Now Glendower has been discussed. Archibald, Earl of Douglas, has been discussed. Now Glendower is a leader of a native guerrilla fighters from the Welsh side. Guerrilla fighters means they hide and fight. The English associate Glendower with the mysterious dark sorcery native to Wales and conceive of him as a magician. So the English associate Glendower with some mysterious dark sorcery. It is not sure whether Glendower was in real life a person who practiced sorcery or black magic, but since he is from Welsh, there is always this tendency to demarcate the other as being mysterious and powerful. Hence Glendower is portrayed as being a magician or a sorcerer. The beastly, shameless form that Welsh women perform upon the bodies of dead Englishmen, presumably a ritual castration or a related rite, is thought to be a kind of voodoo or a mysterious native magic. And then again, there is a reference to how the Welsh women mutilate the body of English soldiers. Now, soon after the battle and soon after Mortimer is captured, the Welsh guerrillas, they lay the bodies of the English fighters out on the streets, and the Welsh women, what they do is that they mutilate the bodies, and this is considered to be a voodoo ritual, a black magic kind of a ritual, a native magic. This sort of nervous interest in the oppressed native cultures of Britain is a running motive throughout the play. And throughout the play, England is portrayed as being, the civilized nation, and all the other neighboring countries or all the other neighboring states going against Britain is portrayed as being barbaric, and that is why there is a reference to how Welsh women mutilate the body of English knights or soldiers. So it shows that here again the Welsh women are portrayed as being the other. They are portrayed as being mysterious, like our Owain Glendower. They are portrayed as performing a voodoo magic. Now the oppressed native is always portrayed as being negative, or as being mysterious and exotic. Now this is always there, a difference between us and the others, and this is prominent in Shakespeare's plays. Even in Shakespeare's time, this was how England viewed the others. They themselves were the civilized, and the others were all barbaric. They would perform black magic and all those voodoo rituals upon others. So they are portrayed as being more or less barbaric. They are portrayed as being barbarians. And then there is again a reference to the Crusades and how the Europeans and their wish to spread Christianity in Jerusalem is considered as a more nobler deed than that of the Muslims. Now Muslims are portrayed as being the invaders. So that is also a theme which runs across this particular play. So here again you can apply post-colonial elements. So with that, we come to an end to today's lecture. I hope that you will be able to write down the characters' names, and you will be able to connect the events. You need to connect the history, the past history of Britain with the context of the play. And that is how you need to learn this play. Since it's a history play, they will ask questions pertaining to the history of Britain as well as pertaining to this particular play. They may ask one essay question from this play, but still it is important. From an examination point of view, it's important. From a comprehensive examination point of view also, this play is important. So please don't skip it. Write down the names of the characters, write down the names of the major places and events. Since this is a history play and they are recounting tales of battles, you need to remember all the battles and the places in which these battles take place, the major castles and the like, and the major characters. Especially the character of Falstaff is important, and the character of Prince Hal is important. So take note of all these things and prepare notes on your own. Now take care. Thank you for listening.